see how far I make it. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first meeting of the Finance Committee to work on the 2024 multi-year budget. My name is Frank Kennis, the chair of the Finance Committee. Before we begin, we'll start with a roll call.
All members are present this evening. Oh, with the exception of Mayor Grantham.
How soon we forget, right? Okay, first item is approval of the agenda. Could I get a motion to approve the agenda? Councillor Pelkman, seconded by Councillor Brennan. Any questions on the agenda? All in favor? And that is carried. Next is any declarations of pecuniary interest. Anyone? Seeing none, that takes us to the meat of the meeting, which is item number 4. We're going to begin this session really looking at where we sit today, I guess is perhaps the best way to say it in terms of reserves and debt. It's been a topic of for a bit of discussion in the past year. And we have a guest with us tonight from BDO who will take us through it. So I'm going to turn it over to our CEO, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight we have Gail Kohler, who's a senior manager with BDO Canada, who will be presenting tonight. I think this will be a familiar face for members of council. Gail has participated and in delivering our audit report to the municipality. So Gail has put together a presentation that she's going to walk us through. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Gail and we'll get underway.
Good afternoon, everyone. If it's okay, I'd like to share my screen. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so just to give you a little bit of information about myself, background. So I have 30 years of experience working in public accounting and have been involved in municipal audits for most of my career. So I currently manage the City of Sarnia, the County of Lambton, the Municipality of Lambton Shores, as well as Strathroy-Caradoc audits. I also work on a wide range of other clients, and based on my experience, I can say that municipal accounting is very different than compared to
Gail, if I could hold you for a second there, anything we can do on our side? Or?
If I may, Mr. Chair. Gail, can we ask you just to speak up a little bit? You're cutting in and out. If you're able to turn up the volume for your microphone, that would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, I'll try to be close. Okay, so I'll just move. Okay, so as you know, municipalities comply with the Ontario Municipal Act. The Act has restrictions on how the municipality prepares their budget and mill rate for property taxes. The Municipal Act also legislates financial decisions such as how much debt a municipality can take on. Municipalities are required to prepare balanced budgets. The budgets are prepared on a cash basis rather than an accrual basis, which is used to prepare financial statements. In addition, a capital budget must be prepared with estimates of project costs, as well as funding sources such as taxation, grants from provincial and federal governments, user fees, development charges, debt, reserve, and reserve funds. In this presentation, I will be talking about some of the options for funding sources, and I'll be talking about debt, development charges, reserves, and reserve funds. Is that better?
I think be as loud as you can.
Okay. Okay, so starting with the definition of debt from Government of Ontario's website, debt is borrowed money that needs to be paid back later. Municipal debt is not a revenue tool, but it can be an important capital financing tool. Long-term debt can be used to fund things like capital projects, for example, rehabilitating a bridge or constructing a water treatment facility. So this slide shows the municipality's long-term debt from 2018 to 2022. And you can see the long-term debt of the municipality has decreased $3.36 million over that time period. At the end of 2022, the municipality's debt was just under $2.8 million. And this slide talks about the annual repayment limit, which is legislated by the province. This is the maximum amount that the municipality can pay in principal and interest in a year for new long-term debt without obtaining approval from the province. It is calculated based on 25% of own source funds, such as property taxes and user fees, less long-term debt, annual payments on existing debt. So now we will look at the annual repayment limit of Strathroy-Caradoc. The forecasted 2023 repayment limit using the province's formula is $8,243,492. This is the amount of additional principal and interest payments the municipality can make without obtaining approval from the province. To determine the amount of new debt the municipality can obtain, it would depend on the interest rate and the repayment terms. For example, the municipality could borrow an additional $102 million if the repayment terms were over 20 years with a 5% interest rate. If you decrease the number of years and increase the interest rate, the amount you could borrow would be less. So the province doesn't tell you how much you can borrow, but instead limits the amount of the annual payments. So the 2023 forecasted principal and interest payments for the year were $837,662. So the municipality has a low amount of debt and can borrow a large amount and still be below the annual repayment limit as determined by the province. So on the provincial website, you can find guidance on what to consider before taking on debt. So the first is need or urgency. Council needs to make tough decisions of which projects need to be priority, taking into the consideration things like public health and safety. The second consideration is interest rates. The municipality was able to take advantage of the low interest rates in previous years. The interest rates on long-term debt reported in 2022 audited financial statements were 1.38% to 4.38%. So the next consideration the province suggests you consider is debt management. The province provides some suggestions on financial indicators that could be used. And on my last slide, we will compare the Strathroy-Caradoc's financial position to two other municipalities of similar size in southwestern Ontario. So the next source of funding I would like to discuss is development charges. The collection of and use of development charges is governed by the Ontario Development Charges Act. Development charges are fees collected from developers to help pay for the cost of infrastructure required to provide municipal services to new developments, such as roads, transit, water, and sewer infrastructure, community centers, fire, and police facilities. The use of these funds must comply with the Act. And at December 31st, 2022, the municipality had 18.1 million in development charges that can be used for infrastructure projects. Okay. The next funding source I'd like to discuss is reserve and reserve funds. Reserve and reserve funds are part of the municipality's accumulated surplus. Council has the ability to allocate the future use of these funds to certain programs or projects. The use of reserve and reserve funds is very helpful in trying to avoid spikes in property taxes and for saving for long-term projects. Reserves can be used in years where there are unplanned expenditures, like a big storm or a winter with lots of snow. Reserves can also be used to accumulate funds for future infrastructure projects. So the municipality has a policy for reserve and reserve funds, which I believe was included in your package. So this slide shows reserve and reserve fund balances from 2018 to 2022. You will see that it has increased by 18.4 million, or 73.7% over 5 years. At December 31st, 2022, the municipality had 43.3 million in reserves and reserve funds. So this slide shows balances reported in the 2023 Q3 update. These balances are not significantly different than the balances at December 31st, 2022. This slide talks about some of the things municipalities should consider when creating a long-term financial plan. A financial plan should include the municipality's priorities and goals. Once the priorities have been decided, a plan can be developed to accomplish the municipality's goals. So the plan should also address the financing of the municipality's asset management plan, and there are several funding sources that should be considered, such as government grants, user fees, property taxes, debt, development charges, reserves, and reserve funds. So the information on this slide came from an article prepared by the FOA, and it talks about why zero debt policy may not be the best policy. So there may be situations whereby delaying infrastructure projects may result in increased costs. It may be wise to borrow in order to take advantage of grants that are available. It also says projects financed with debt should have long-term benefits and should only be taken on if the source of repayment is identified and is manageable. So I excerpts from the City of Sarnia policy. I just included this information to point out that financial policies from other municipalities may be a good resource to consider when you're preparing your own financial policies. This slide shows some of the targets included in the City of Sarnia policy. And so for this slide, it's a comparison to other size or similar size municipalities. I selected 2 municipalities for comparison by looking at a list of municipalities with their population size. I selected 2 with similar populations that were in southwestern Ontario, and both are close to large cities. So as you can see, we're comparing to Town of Essex and Middlesex Centre. The first 2 lines show that the municipalities have very similar revenue and population. This information is from their most recent published audited statements. So all 3 municipalities on this slide have a very strong financial position. All 3 have large cash balances and a large net financial asset balance. So the cash balances are 65 million for Strathroy-Caradoc, $67 million for Essex, and $59 million for Middlesex Center. Net financial assets, which equals financial assets, that doesn't include tangible capital. Lists all of your liabilities. So all three municipalities have large financial asset balances at $45 million for Strathroy-Caradoc, $54 million for Essex, and $42 million at Middlesex Center. So just looking at Strathroy-Caradoc, your net financial assets is $45 million at December 31st, 2022. The municipality can pay off their debts and liabilities and have $45 million left over. So this is a good indicator of strength of the municipality's financial position. You also note that Essex and Middlesex both have larger long-term debt balances, both exceeding $17 million. Strathroy-Caradoc debt is less than $3 million. Strathroy's debt per capita is $116. Essex is $841, and Middlesex Center is $909. So you also note development charges. For Strathroy-Caradoc has a much larger balance at $18 million. Essex has a small balance, and Middlesex Center has a negative balance. So these funds are available for future infrastructure projects and should be considered when looking at the overall reserve and reserve funds. When the three balances are included together, which is the bottom line, you can see Strathroy-Caradoc is at $61 million, while Essex is at $64 million, and Middlesex Center is $55 million. So there does seem to be a difference between the classifications of reserve and reserve funds. The other two municipalities have significantly more in reserve funds when compared to reserves. So the difference between reserves and reserve funds is the fact that a reserve fund has an asset attached, which is usually cash. But this is not too concerning, however, because if you look at the cash balances of the three municipalities, you can see balances are similar for all three. So I'd be happy to take questions now.
Thank you, Gail. Are there questions? Councillor Wilson.
Just a question on the development charges, with ours being at 18 million, and knowing the other two, I've spent considerable time driving through both of them just with work. I see Essex and Middlesex Center are both growing. They have a lot of commercial. They both seem to be booming. Is maybe and I guess I'm not sure if this is to BDO or to maybe our staff, is the reason that we have so much in development charges and the other ones don't, do we not have a place to spend them, or should we not have spent them to be similar with these other municipalities that are growing? I'm just wondering if the level of our development charges being so high is actually a concern because we haven't spent them on infrastructure projects, we're letting them sit in cash.
I will turn it over to Bill or Jennifer to comment on that.
Thank you, Chair, through you to Councillor Wilsey. So I think for us, the biggest thing was when I started here in 2012, a lot of our DCs were for future projects. And so we're slowly changing over now to, for past projects. So we've made the transition now to future projects. So we're going to see, so a lot of this would be, for instance, for water, wastewater projects that are coming up. Other projects such as, a good example would be the Park House Road. Those projects are now in these plans. So part of it is right sizing. So we're going to see some of these DCs starting to diminish over the next probably 4 to 5 years, I would say. So we've built them up based on the fact that now we've got some of these future projects, and it's a matter of those future projects coming online. So that's why I would say for us, we're in a sort of a strong positive position. I really can't comment too much on the other two municipalities, but for us, part of it is just right sizing that development charges.
Gail, would you have any comment on that question?
So I don't have any knowledge of Town of Essex or Middlesex Center. I would agree with what Bill is saying. I believe the 2023 budget for Strathroy-Caradoc included significantly more development targets for your capital projects than in past years.
Okay, any other questions? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering for our own internal purposes, when the Director of Finance or yourself are speaking of reserves, are you including with that reserve funds, or do we always speak of them completely separately?
That's a good question.
Through the chair to the deputy mayor, so I would say that typically what we do is we speak of reserve and reserve funds. We are trying, and you'll see this probably coming forward in the 23 year end, we're trying to sort of better line up actual cash assets to our reserves, so then they become reserve funds. So that's been a slow process. So on the current comparison, you'll sort of see that we're almost flipped from the other two municipalities, I would say. So it's the way of allocation. So we need to better line up our cash with our reserve funds. But typically when we speak of reserve funds, they're lumped together, the two.
Any other questions? Councillor Pelton.
It's not a question so much about what's been presented, but I'm just trying to think of when we had to bring in our asset management plan, because prior to that, all projects were done by incurring debt, whereas once we had to do the asset plan, now we're starting to save for things prior to it. I'm just trying to think of how long that process has been, but it's not that long ago.
Director Dakin.
So through the chair to Councillor Pelkman, asset acknowledgement, if you want to call it that, began in the province in 2009. Our first asset management plan was in 2013, and we've updated it again, I think it was in 2020 or 2021 was the last time we updated that asset management plan. And to be honest, the biggest thing there is prior to 2009, municipalities did not recognize depreciation, and we still don't recognize depreciation in our budgeting process. That would be something that I would say in the multi-year budget moving forward, we can start weaning that into our budget process, because I think that's going to be where you're going to be funding most of your asset management out of, is actually acknowledging depreciation. Prior to, like you said, prior to 2009, municipalities, when they did capital projects, they were expensed. So there was no asset recognized, therefore there was no depreciation recognized. Switching over in 2009 to, for lack of a better term, accrual accounting, really, because prior to that it was really cash accounting by municipalities. So in 2009, when we started to sort of recognize that accrual accounting piece, that's why we continue to budget on a cash basis as opposed to an accrual basis. And so with the multi-year budget, we'll be able to now start maybe bring that process in a bit, where we can start acknowledging depreciation, which then would be moved to our asset management plan.
Thank you, Bill. Any other questions? Seeing none. Gail, any other comments before we let you go? I think we're
If I may, before Gail leaves, perhaps she would like to remain as we move forward with the other documents in the package, just in case there are some questions there as well.
sure. If you're okay with that, Gail?
Yes, of course.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so if there's no other questions on this 4.1, do we need to pass any resolutions receiving 4.1 or?
So we can certainly receive Gil's presentation for information, or you may choose to do that after we've moved through these documents.
What's your? Okay. Could we get a recommendation then to receive her presentation? Councillor Peltman, Deputy Mayor McGuire. Any other questions? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. So next we move on to 4.2, where we take a deeper dive into our reserve funds and trust funds. And Bill, I assume you'll be handling this for us.
Certainly, thank you. So I'll just quickly go through and you can sort of see what's anticipated in 2023 and sort of where we'll be ending up, or projection ending up at the end of 2023. So the first piece is our development charges, and as we've already alluded to, you can see how we're starting to use up in 2023. We're budgeting to use up 6.5 million of our 18 million in DCs. And as we've noted before in these conversations financially, that a lot of these processes, then there's an ebb and flow to your DC. So I'll bring to your attention the Strathroy or the engineering reserve. So that engineering reserve, you'll see we're currently sitting at 1.1 million. We're slated to use 5.3 million, which would then put it in a deficit. That deficit then would be filled in as development comes online. And so a good example there again is that Park House one, where we budgeted money to be used in the Park House extension there, and the work being done there. That would then be filled back in or recouped through the sale of lots, and then as those buildings take place, the development takes place, filling those in. So it's an ebb and flow to those. The next one is our deferred revenue. Deferred revenue, if you remember what deferred revenue is where we've received funding already, but it is earmarked for a specific purpose. Therefore, it sits until that specific purpose comes about. And I guess a good example would be the OSIF one, where you can sort of see at the end of 2022, we had 1.1 million. There's budgeted additions to that OSIF funding of almost 2 million, but we've also budgeted reducing it down in the current year by 1.2 million, so we'll end up with a 1.8. So those numbers, so those funds are for specific purposes, and then as those specific purposes come about, those funds would be earmarked for that specific purpose and spent for that. The next is reserve funds. So we've kind of, with these reserve funds, we talk about, as we've already alluded to, reserve funds and reserves. So the first group that we come to is the obligatory. So these are ones where we've set up, we're obligated to set up these reserves. So you can sort of see how those ebb and flow, and I'll bring your attention to a number that, there's a couple that will go into a deficit. Again, that's based on just the ebb and flow. So you'll see the biggest one being our wastewater reserve, so it's budgeted. That will end up in a deficit, but one of the things to keep in mind here is a lot of these budgeted reductions are multi-year, so we might not hit all of that money coming out of that reserve in a given year. So the budgeted result may be different than the actual result there. But you can see, like for instance, on that reserve alone, there's 2.6 million being budgeted to go into that reserve, and that's part of that, as council will recall, the long-term financial plan for water and wastewater talked about how that our reserves would be depleted, almost depleted, and then back. So this is a lot to do with timing of those reserves, those reserve transfers. And then finally we move to the discretionary reserves. So these are ones that we've set up over time, and they're more discretionary in nature, and you can see how those react. And then finally we have trust funds. So they are pretty well based on our cemeteries. So there is a formula set out by the province that requires that money on any sale of interments and sale of cemetery plots has to be set aside for care and maintenance of those properties. So that is more legislated, hugely legislated and hugely regulated. We currently invest a portion of that money to make sure that we're getting some good interest return so that we can continue to build those. If there's any questions on that, I'll take those at this time, and then we'll move into the other documents.
Just to comment, we've got a bunch of funds, but they're really bookkeeping entries. They're not, we don't have separate bank accounts that show there's X amount of dollars in this one or X amount of dollars in this one, and we have an overdraft on this one. It's purely bookkeeping entries. There's one large lump sum of money.
So through the chair to the chair. So one of the things that the municipality wasn't doing prior to 2012 was segregating a lot of these funds. So for instance, for security deposits, those kinds of things, the municipality was just depositing that into their general account. And then unfortunately, if a developer came back and asked for that money, it had to be pulled out of a general account. So we've now segregated a number of those funds, and that's going back to the Deputy Mayor's comment about reserves and reserve funds. So we do have a reserve fund account, and that's why you'll see that is denoted on the financial statements as such. So one of the things that we're doing is looking at how do we move more of that funds out of our operating account, which is healthy, into that reserve account. Again, it's a timing thing. Once you move them into those reserve accounts, you need to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck. So those are we're now in a position where we can start moving some of that money around. So that's why I said you'll see some of that correction in 2023. So there is a number of funds that are in segregated accounts. Development charges are a good example. Development charges have their own account. So every development charge that we receive is put into a development charges bank account. So we have, just off the top of my head, about 7 different bank accounts that we operate, and so those funds are moved in. But what you're seeing in front of you here is an account within financial accounting software that denotes where those funds are sitting.
Sorry. Councillor Cameron.
Just had a question about some of the grant money that's sitting here. So like MTO cycling grant, and the stabilization grant. They seem pretty specific, and it doesn't look like we've used them. So I assume you wrote a grant, a proposal, and got money to do something specific. So why hasn't that money been used in the grant programs?
Through the chair to Councillor Bammer. For some of these, we haven't closed out that project yet. So like the cycling grant, for instance, they gave us a go-ahead because there was some surplus funds in there to do trails, bike trails. So you'll notice that there's a bike trail that goes through, for instance, Alexander Park So that was added as part of the cycling grant. The York Street complex is getting trails put in there. So we're getting close to the end. So once we get to the end of those projects that have run out, then we would either allocate those funds into something else, free them up for something else. But obviously we need to petition the province on behalf of what we're going to be doing with that, because they were given for specific purposes.
Can I just ask what the cannabis one was for?
We do have the, through the chair to Councillor Payne, we do have the police chief here. And it was initially when we got that cannabis, so that was for the legalization of cannabis, and everyone anticipated crime to go through the roof. And so there was funds set aside for that. So we've been keeping that sort of undercover, pardon the pun, from the police. But now those funds, so we can look at what we can apply those funds for. Again, it was fairly restricted. We didn't have a lot of that. It was just carte blanche money handed from the province. So we need to revisit some of those. And so those are some of the things, excuse me, that we can look at in the 2024 budget, using up some of these and getting those cleaned up and off the record.
Councillor Hill.
Thank you. Through yourself to Director Dakin, so do we have a certain timeline? So if we were to apply for a grant, let's just say, let's use cannabis because that's fun. So if we weren't to use that, but we knew another one was coming up, can we get another one? Like, do we have to use one before we get another one? Do we have a time limit, how long we can hang on to these?
Through the chair to Councillor Hippel. So a lot of these projects or a lot of these grant fundings will come with timelines. Some don't. Like the cannabis one is a good example. It was basically, here's money to offset the crime increase that's going to happen. I can't speak to crime increase, but that money, there is no deadline as to when that needs to be spent. I think what we have to do is revisit what that money was exactly for and see if we can make it fit some of the stuff coming forward.
From the chair to Director Dakin, just looking at that, with your comments you just made there, you had talked about the MTO cycling grant and a few things that we're using that money for, but there's nothing on the spreadsheet that we're using that for. In addition, I don't see anywhere out of the future needs where there's enough to cover the loan we made to Caradoc Housing earlier this year. So my question is, with these being labeled as budgeted, are these numbers accurate? Because from what you just said about using the cycling, plus knowing that there's a loan to Caradoc Housing that's not reflected in the future needs balance, are these just budgeted and they're not actual? And if they're not actual, will we be getting an updated one with actuals before we have to decide on where we're spending?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilsey. So if I understand your question, budget additions and budget reductions, are they budgeted or actual? Is that correct?
No, I'm just wondering if everything is included, because I think what I'm asking for is if this report is based on budgeted, because there's a number of things that, from your statements and that we've passed in council, that are actual, which don't appear to be reflected in this document.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilsey. So these are actually just budgeted numbers. So using the budget. So for instance, like you say, the future needs one with the loan to the Caradoc Housing, that wouldn't be budgeted. That will be actual because you committed those funds. So this is a budgeted amount. So there will be another, obviously, at the year end. One of the things that we have to do is prescribed by the province is provide council with that list of transfers in and out of reserves. So that will be part, that 1.1 will be part. So you want to take so future needs, for instance, will actually go down by another 1.1 because of the transfer to Caradoc Housing. So that will now be 1.8 million. if we also go through with the 580.
Just as a follow-up to that, will we, I think council should have an updated document. Is that something that we can get where we know where we're at with each of these budgets as for what actuals have been for the first 10 months of the year as we're deciding where we're spending money? Or do we have to go off budgeted because there's nothing else available?
I think that's a bit of an unfair question, because I mean, we just dealt with the Caradoc housing last Monday. This was presented Tuesday or Wednesday of, you know, I don't think there's any deception here, all right?
That's not even what he's talking.
That's not, I didn't even talk about.
Well, I'm not sure what you're suggesting, again, that there's something untoward being done or that we're not accounting for things properly. That's what you're suggesting.
That is not at all what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is that there was a loan we made back in the spring to Caradoc Housing that's not reflected on these
Okay.
documents. And I'm asking if we can get actuals before we decide on where we're spending money, so we know what we have to spend.
Okay, all right.
So through the chair to Councillor Wilsey, by all means, we'll make sure that this is updated. What was requested was the budgeted additions and the budgeted expenditures. And that's what I've provided. More than happy to add a third column of things that are already committed. But I would say that there, other than that 1.1 million, there's probably very few that would be actually already accounted for. And again, if you keep in mind, typically reserve transfers are done at year end, and that's, but I think in light of what you're discussing with budget, and if we're gonna be using a budgeted amount, it's probably healthy to have that number in front of you as well, so we'll make sure that that's done.
Deputy Mayor.
One of the problems I'm having, first of all, I really like the document, so thank you, but on the account name, for perhaps it's just me, but when you first read it, I'm trying to figure out what we're speaking about. So this may be way too much work to ask, I don't know, but is it possible to put in, like on a fund, there must be probably a title page. I suspect there's an electronic documentation with a title page about what a fund is. Like, I'll take a specific, let's just go right to the very top where I'm looking at the very first page, the very first item, development charge, BI number 1410, general governance, I suspect that is. Like, is there a possibility of hyperlinking a document so I could click on that and it would say, like, just in a paragraph, this is this? And maybe there's some that perhaps don't need it, like in the cemetery, it's pretty self-explanatory. But on a lot of them, I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure what we're talking about. Page 2, OCIF formula funding deferred revenue. So we're talking $1.1 million, but I'm just wondering if those documents exist electronically where we can just do hyperlinks so that we could just quickly understand what it is we're speaking about.
So through the chair, there wouldn't be, like, for some of these things, there would be, like, a document would be like a larger document, but are you looking for just like a one sentence description of the item? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, really,
Okay.
like a sentence, maybe it takes 2 sentences. I just want to know, like, that's this, or that's that.
Sure. I certainly think if I can, Mr. Dakin, if we can sort of provide a little bit more detail.
Certainly, through the chair to the deputy mayor. So for instance, for the development charges, those numbers flow exactly from our development charges study. So if you were to click on our development charges study, you would find the general government and all the projects that are underneath that. You'd find fire, all the projects that we're collecting. So it used to be every 5 years, now it's every 10 years that we have to update our development charges. So what we do is go out on that 10-year, 20-year horizon, look at projects that are coming. They're submitted, so they would fall under their category. So general government, nothing really rushes to my head as to what would constitute a general government DC. But fire, for instance, any expansion to our fire halls or any addition of extra equipment would go under there. So that's what we're collecting on. And then that's set up So that's how those are arrived at. You'll notice that under the development charges, you've got Mount Bridges wastewater, then you've got Mount Bridges wastewater special area 1 and special area 2. So those are, again, through the DC study, those areas were delineated needing extra funding. So through the DC study, all of those would be set up through the DC study. So if one were to look at, and I could link, even send out the DC study, that you could see where those, and the projects that are attached to those. As far as OSIF and those others, by all means, more than happy to provide that. OSIF is just the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. So that is, it's replacing the OOMF money, or sort of a general grant that we would have received from the province. This is grant money that's based on formula funding, based on our asset, based on our size of our community. Those are funds that are provided to help with infrastructure work done within the municipality. But we can definitely make those clearer if need be. A lot of the grants, you'll notice in our grant reserve policy, which is attached to this meeting, outlines what those reserves and reserves funds were for when they're set up. They're actually sort of a bit of a definitions given to those.
I think it's a fair request. You know, even you mentioned cemetery is straightforward, but even cemetery, I don't think is totally straightforward because there are different things.
I'm just thinking, like, I'm used to working with like an active Excel file with hyperlinks.
Yep.
I'm not sure if that's something staff are able to do or aware of how to do it. I'm sure somebody does.
I know the St. Clair Conservation Authority has a number of reserves as well, and I know they're going through the process of reviewing those reserves to see, you know, whether some are even necessary anymore, right? So I think that's a fair comment to make, to go through those reserves periodically to see whether, you know, to explain to us what they are, and maybe even to explain sometimes internally what they're for, because we may have forgotten what they were for. So I think it's a good thing to review those on a regular basis.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions?
And then attached to your documents here is the actual current reserve and reserve fund policy, which walks through, which was established in 2018. Obviously something that should be reviewed at some point, but it was our first reserve and reserve fund policy that was put out. And it attaches, like I said, a listing of some of those different reserves and reserve funds. So that is there as well. And then finally, the last item in your package is sort of an example or a sample of what to expect for the operating budget. As you recall, we sort of did in past one big spreadsheet with all the different departments. So we'll still have that, but there'll be a breakdown for each. So like for instance, under the administration, this is an example. This is actually from the town of St. Mary's. This is their administration. So what it shows is all the different forms of revenue. What they do is end up with the grand total at the bottom, which is the taxation being asked for from the, so we'll actually switch that around, so it'll be under revenue, it'll be the tax, different revenue streams within the different departments, and then trying to sort of roll up into major categories the expenses that are in each of the departments, and we'll try and keep those fairly consistent through the different departments. So you might see some departments that have no cost under an expense category, where others might or might not. So it just gives you something to understand what the operating budget will look like. The capital will be very similar. The only difference will be capital will have more of a business plan sheet for each project that going forward as well. Happy to answer any questions on those two documents.
Councillor Felton?
Through the chair to Director Dakin. So just want to make sure that when we do get our spreadsheets that we're looking at multiple years of actual versus budget as opposed to just 1 year.
So if I understand the question, you, when the budget comes, like this one shows what you're saying is just the budgets, not the actual, and therefore it'd be good to have the actual for those departments and stuff.
Well, I know
in the budget.
In the past, I think we've had 3 years of actuals and budgets so we can compare to see if there's any trends. It's kind of hard to do it on a 1 year basis to see what our spending has been and if it needs to be there in that category.
So through the chair to Councillor Copeland, certainly we'll provide 3 years at least of actuals. Obviously, the budget beyond 2024 will be budget. We won't have actual years for that. But each year, so then when we update, because each of those multi-year budgets will have to be revisited each year, when that sheet comes out, we'll drop off 1 year and add the most current.
Other questions? CEO.
If I may, just to highlight to council, as we work our way through the budget process, this reserve and reserve fund policy, to keep it on hand, as you can see on the third page of it, it has a nice 1 page of all of those definitions that we just heard in Gail's presentation. So it's a nice one to have on hand as we work our way through the budget and you know, reference different reserve funds and reserves. And again, as Mr. Dakin mentioned, there's a really nice several pages of sort of the sort of definitions or what some of these reserve funds are allocated are. So again, that might be a nice handy document to keep beside you as we work our way through the process. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yep.
I guess I had more just kind of a comment as opposed to a question. Like when we're doing this, we're already done our Q3, right? Like our third quarter? Yes.
Through the chair to Councillor Derbyshire, yes, correct.
Okay. Can we not be up to those numbers so that we at least know what we're operating with? I realize the reserves are only done once a year, but if we're gonna wait till December to do that, then I have to wait till then to approve this. Like, until you can see what's actually going on, I'm not just approving a budgeted budget. Like, you know, I mean, I'm only going back to that because it should be in there that it was proposed, that money was lent in March. You know, like it should be out of that fund so that we're working on up to date. Same with any other thing that's already been pulled out and gone, like in quarter 1, 2, or 3. You know, when we hit budget time, if we don't know what we're actually working with, then we're just working on what we think we were gonna do. I mean, that's just my comment.
I think that's fair. I mean, there might be some categories where
Yes.
they're seasonal things or whatever that might do, but I think for the most part, especially operational, a quarter is a quarter, right? So.
Yeah, like we should be up to date on that,
Yep.
you know, all the way along. I understand we just did that with Caradoc and that can be in quarter 4,
Yep.
which is fine. You know, I have no problem with that. I just think moving along, not just for reserves and this and that, like whatever, you know,
Yep.
as close to where we're at as we can get would be nice.
Yeah, and if there is projected to be some overage on a particular category, then yeah, we should be aware of that too while we're at it too, right? So, Councilor Brennan.
I'd just like to say that historically, there hasn't been a year, I don't think, where we haven't, as a council, been able to work with our staff to come up with another refinement each year in the budget process. There's no 1 year where we've done it perfectly, but I think over the last 20 to 25 years, we've been getting successively better. The challenges initially of amalgamation were tremendous in terms of financing. and budgeting. And then when the province came along, we had to do the asset management plans, and that was a radical shift. And even computer technologies and the way that we manipulate numbers now compared to 20 years ago, we're getting better at it all the time. It gets more complex with the level of detail that we are privy to each year. And my observation would be that the level of analysis that we were capable of doing 20 years ago versus now is vastly different. But with that said, I think we need to be mindful that we just saw that, just from 2018 alone, but if we go back to 2012 or 2008, the radical drop in our long-term debt, and I think since 2018 we've dropped it by 50%. And at the same time, the steadfast building of reserves, we practically doubled them since 2018. We are in a position now that is fundamentally so much stronger than we were in the early 2000s. I think Councillor Pelton will remember there was quite a bit of nail biting at one point, and you yourself probably, Councillor Kennis, we were in a very vulnerable and precarious situation in the early 2000s. It's vastly improved, and I think we can certainly thank Director Dakin for the work he's done to each year improve our ability to understand what's going on. And any suggestions we have this year to make it better, and as we move into this multi-year project, will be, I think, fantastic. And it's our job to further improve the budget process so that in 2026, when the new council comes in, they have an even better budget process than we have now. But I can say from personal experience, our budget process the last few years is vastly superior to what it was 10 years ago. And a lot of that has to do with the expertise that we have in our finance department and just the steadfast refusal of past councils to, not take the easy route, but to engage in significant decision-making that I think has really helped the long-term health of this municipality. So I look forward to going into the multi-year process because that's another chapter in what we've been doing. And I think, as just go back to my original comment, every year we refine it and make it a little bit better. And that's not to say we're doing it badly before, we just keep improving it. So I think any suggestions about how we can make it a little bit better this year are welcome, and I look forward to seeing the improvements.
Appreciate the comment, Councillor Brennan. I want to apologize for getting a little heated earlier. I'm just concerned that, we're in as you've seen by the numbers tonight, we are in an incredibly strong financial position, this municipality. Our debt is about 2% of what our allowed for number would be. Not that we'd ever want to go to 100 million in 100 million years, but we're at about 2% of what our limit would be. Our reserves are strong. We're in a strong financial position. We've got a lot of things on our plate coming forward that, will take many years perhaps to finance or a lot of thought given before we move ahead with any of those projects. But we're at least in a position where we can consider them. And I don't want to start off looking at that we're in a weak position, because we're anything but in a weak position. And from that, we'll move forward with Councillor Pelton.
Yes, thank you to the chair. Just observation, I guess. I brought up about the change earlier in the demands from the provincial government and how we did spending prior to that, which was if there was a project we took on debt and you managed your debt payments according to your cash flow and decided on what we were going to do on capital projects based on that. There were no reserves. There was no. This is almost weird for some of us who have been around a little longer. But if there's going to be an accusation that's laid down, the accusation is that we haven't spent enough. When you go around and you look at Middlesex Center, who's got an almost brand new works yard, a new fire hall, those are things that are in our future soon. but they've gone ahead and done them already, which is why their reserves are probably depleted compared to ours. Even Southwest Middlesex has a new fire hall, and we're just getting around to ours. So if certainly we could have gone an orgy of spending in the last council because there was all that money was sitting there, but we did not, because it's always been a list of things and where our priorities were to say this has got to happen first before this can happen, and this has got to happen before that can happen. And we're at the point where some of those bigger projects are coming to date, and we knew that at the end of the last term of council, but we didn't want to make those long-term decisions and tie the hands of the next council with those massive debt decisions. It wouldn't have been proper. So I just wanted to say that we had the opportunity to spend that money, but didn't because it was not prudent at the time to do so.
I agree. I also think that, in hindsight, perhaps we should have borrowed money 3 or 4 years ago or 2 years ago when it was at its lowest in terms of interest rates. And but as they say, hindsight is 20/20. So anyway, Councillor Cameron.
Just following up on Councillor Pelkman's comments about prioritizing. Over the past year, we've talked about a lot of projects, fire halls, arenas, some big ticket items that we know are being done. Just wondering, I guess this question is to CAO, how will we incorporate setting those priorities as we do this multi-year budget? It seems to me that we have a budget conversation, but we also need to have a prioritization conversation so we know what to budget or what's going to come first in what order. How is that going to work?
Through the chair, yes, that's already on the list of what we need to have a discussion with council. It's also tying in the asset management plan. It's taking all of these pieces that already exist and having a conversation of what's been discussed, and as you said, what are the priorities, and then how is the municipality going to move forward on with that. So that's a single separate conversation that council is going to have, and it's going to be a long conversation, but one that's paramount to determine how council and how the municipality is going to move forward. So that is on the list, already has been earmarked for part of the council discussion or part of the budget discussion.
Strategic plan is also being updated.
That's correct. The strategic plan is, we'll be launching it in November, and so there'll be a lot of opportunity through that process to have some discussions about priorities on a whole for the municipality.
You just brought up the point I was going to. Yep.
Any other questions on this? So this will pretty much end our meeting tonight. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to just make a quick comment as we talk about how we've done them, and I do agree things have been built up well over the last 5 years, but looking at the numbers, when I consider the debt that we're taking on for the road construction projects we're doing this year, we actually are very close in both debt and reserves to our 2018 levels with where we're expected to be. So it's, yes, they've been built up, but we've also spent a significant amount over the last year as well. So we are doing a good job at bringing them back down.
I don't see where the debt is going up. I mean, we've at the end of the budget, we agreed to looking at borrowing, but I'm not sure if we're in a position where we need to borrow.
Through the chair, I think it was around 5 million, 4.9 million is sitting in the 2023 budget for taking on debt. Again, one of those things is timing. So when does that come in? Like for instance, right now, we're closing off the debt opportunity through Infrastructure Ontario. So applying for any money from them for those road projects will probably not happen in 2023, but in 2024.
So what does that mean?
But certainly, I mean, when we meet next time, it'll be on the capital budget. We'll want to know where we sit in terms of debt obligations moving forward and where we go in 2024 and beyond.
What does that statement just mean? we're not gonna get anything, so we need to borrow 5 million?
No, what that means is the project hasn't closed yet. We've got $65 million in cash. So if we need to, if all of a sudden all the bills came due right away, we would pay them as cash and we'd fill it in with the debt in 2024.
All right.
Just, I think that would be the same as, that's how most businesses would operate, that you would, because of the way our funding is done through Infrastructure Ontario, obviously we could go out for a loan through our bank, and get a loan that way, and it's not restricted as to timelines, the way that works with Infrastructure Ontario. But the province has set timelines as to when you can apply for your funds and the process to go through that. You'll see one coming up in November for the fire truck that was bought in 2022. Now that we finally got that money and got the truck, we're now applying for that loan. So you'll see that in the November meeting for that 2022 fire truck.
Okay, can I ask one more? So, when you say a grant, I guess my assumption is that's free money. But you're saying we're applying for loans. Like, maybe I'm confused here. I thought we were talking, I think of a grant as they're giving us money. But now you're saying, no, we apply for a loan.
So, through the chair to Councillor Derbyshire. So I guess I'm confused as to what the question was then. I thought you said about debt. We've got 5 million in debt. What do you mean by that?
So my question was, we were gonna take on 5 million in debt, and you said, no, we can apply for grants. So then my assumption is that 5 million is free if we get those grants. But what you're saying is we can apply through a different thing for a loan, not through a bank?
Through the chair to Councillor Derbyshire. So Infrastructure Ontario is a lending agency of the province. That, if you look at our debt schedule, there's several debts on there or payments that
Can I just stop there? I don't want to interrupt, but so when you say it's a lending institution, it's not a free money institution, it's a loan.
They make loans at a reduced rate to municipalities.
Right, but at the reduced rate, is that why we call it a grant?
No, we don't call it a grant. So grant would be grant. So like OSIF, for instance, OSIF is grant money. There's a difference between our grants and our loans. Yep.
So at this point, we were talking about a $5 million.
Yeah, that's really all
in the budget. At this point, we haven't borrowed it yet. So, and I guess it's a question, do we need to borrow it in 2023? And if we don't, then it'll
move to 2024. Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Maybe just to see if it'll clarify it. So if we bought a fire truck in 2022, why are we only applying for those funds now?
So, through the chair to Councillor Pelkman. So, we received that vehicle in the end of 2022 after the window had closed on the funding or the ability to apply for those funds for the loan. Maybe I should stop using the word fund. Use it and apply for the loan. Apply for the loan. And then the next, obviously, then we got into our budget. Then we got into interim CAO. So all of those things transpiring in order to apply for the loan, we now apply for that loan, and that, you'll see that coming through. So that's why. Typically, they close the window beginning of October. So around beginning of October, anything that you're gonna get for that current year, you have to have already applied for. So anything after that would then be the following year.
And just for clarification, Infrastructure Ontario is a arm of the Ontario government, or is it like a?
It is part of Infrastructure Ontario, so it's an arm of the provincial government. The provincial government loans funds at a reduced rate to municipalities. Okay. So I think right now, Infrastructure Ontario on a 5-year loan is around 4 something. 4.3 we'll say, whereas if we were to go to the bank, we're probably looking at prime plus, So prime is at 5 if I'm not mistaken, so.
Is it, I
you're
think
looking
it's
at
6 or 6
to
something, so
7%.
you're looking at probably 7%, 7 or 8%.
So it's a reduced savings, yeah.
That does clarify it. When I heard funds, this, that, unless I hear loan, I think the government's giving out funding, right? So to know that it's a loan, I get it now.
And I guess we should all, ask about clarification on terminology as well. The CAO, when we were talking last week, has used the term debenture. And debenture is a loan term, and that was, you heard the term, I'm not calling you old, but you heard that term debenture 20 years ago and now you don't hear it as much, you would hear loan. So I guess, yeah, there's a rollover of people that get used to certain terms, and so we just have to, again, be clear to one another about, if you don't understand what's being said, ask for clarity. And sometimes we get heated, like I do, and then we say things that we use the wrong word too. So just again, always ask, if you don't understand, ask for the clarification. All right. I think that is it tonight. So the next meeting will be November the 27th, Monday the 27th, and Monday, December the 11th. The 27th of November, the aim is to first look at the capital budget there, and then the second meeting, I believe, will be looking at operating budgets there. The goal is to try to get a budget by February, early February. I know there's near the end of February. I know me and at least one other councillor will be gone, so hopefully we'll be able to get those finished up by then. But January's a slow month, so we can meet daily. Yeah, get through it. Okay. Anything that we need to pass yet?
Just a motion to adjourn.
Okay. So the recommendation is that the Finance Committee adjourn at 6:12. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Pammer, all in favor? Thank you. Yeah, we'll be moving into the special meeting of council now.